Good evening, everybody. It's Nick from Real Progressives. And what I want to talk to you about today and it's a really important topic, in my opinion. In fact, it's probably going to resound with many people who are in the progressive movement as the make or break for the progressive movement in general. Of course, there are sub-facets that are going to need to occur over time in order to make a statement about whether or not the progressive movement is actually moving forward or it's more status quo in terms of neoliberalism, in terms of incrementalism, in terms of false promises of hope and change and things of that nature.
I think I probably have a much higher IQ than you do. This country needs a leader, and leaders change attitudes about people. And we begin to change the attitudes of Americans about what their responsibilities are to the poor, about what their responsibilities are to other people, and about what our responsibility in the world is. And that requires changing attitudes. About that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. They must be taken off the street. They will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets. We have no choice but to take them out of society. They are in jail. Away from my mother, your husband, our families.
Can you tell the committee what was the most embarrassing of all the incidences that you have alleged? It is appropriate to ask Professor Hill anything any member wishes to ask her to plumb the depths of her credibility.
Lobbyists aren't bad people. Special interest groups are not bad people. But guess what? They're corrosive. People who accept money from them aren't bad people. But it's human nature. You go out, Lynn, and bundle $250,000 for me, all legal, and then you call me after I'm elected and say, Joe, I'd like to come and talk to you about something. You didn't buy me, but it's human nature. You helped me. I'm going to say, sure, Lynn, come on in.
This is one bad guy, one really tough guy. And he, for 40 years, had his folks under his thumb. And he's dead, and he's dead, and he's dead. And he's dead. And it's going to give the people of Libya for a first chance in 4 decades to actually put together their own government. And they have a little bit of freedom, a little bit of opportunity. And I am very optimistic about Iraq. I think it's going to be one of the great achievements of this administration. You're going to see a stable government in Iraq that is actually moving toward a representative government.
What do you say to when one of those Bernie delegates comes to you and says, listen, I'm just not going for Hillary. I'm standing by my principles.
You know, I look at you, I said, I know you're going to go for Hillary. So they're not going to pull the lever for Trump, for God's sake. If they're here in this floor for Bernie, they can't possibly.
And Joe, who knows her, leaned forward and whispered some encouragement, telling her that she was doing great, that she looked wonderful.
Do I consider it inappropriate to smell someone's hair, to get so close that I smell their hair? Yes.
He was talking to me while he was rubbing my nose with his.
I just want you to know I had permission to hug Lonnie. All those kids, you want to come up on the stage, you can come up. It's okay. Come on up. And you guys can sit in the edge or what. I don't want you to have to stand all alone, but it's up to you. By the way, he gave me permission to touch him.
But I want to talk about the Democratic candidates who are running for president right now in terms of they are a clown car. And we joked a lot in 2016 when Donald Trump and Ted Cruz and Ben Carson and Marco Rubio and all this jokers were running against one another. And what I discovered was that there's some kind of game of smoke and mirrors going on here. I think that Jeb Bush was the presumptive nominee. Well, that got rooted out really quickly by the Republican constituents. And they were looking for some kind of hope and change beyond Obama's so-called hope and change. And we know that Donald Trump, to some extent, to a large extent, represented that. And I think to his loyal following, he still represents that. And they still think that he's some kind of messianic figure, rising from the ashes of the Obama era policies and his presidency. And I'm not going to get into too much about what the rationale reasoning is for why someone would have voted for Donald Trump and still support Donald Trump till this moment in time. Nonetheless, it is without a doubt that he has an incredibly loyal following who are going to follow him straight off the cliff like the Pied Piper. I was watching a show by Jamal Thomas recently, and he was really talking about the topic that I want to talk about today. And I was like, damn, you're going to steal my thunder. But what I want to do is I want to add on to Jamal Thomas's commentary on really the setup here with all these various different candidates on the Democratic side, and what is their goal? What is the end game? What is the motive? We have to speak in terms of our own understanding and awareness of how this is going on. We'll never get a really what went wrong kind of thing when these candidates start dropping out, and slowly but surely it becomes Sanders, Warren, and Biden in one order of those three candidates. But we can say, in my opinion, with a high degree of certainty, if not prognostication, that the goal is ultimately to play spoiler to Bernie Sanders, and to some extent to Elizabeth Warren, in terms of the policies that they're putting forward. So as we're getting close to the early debates, and we get to see these town halls on CNN, and we get to see the pretty massive crowds that Bernie is turning out. And I was watching recently that Bernie had, I think it was one of his Texas rallies, he had 274,000 views from his Facebook page. That's a lot of people watching just from his Facebook page, not to mention coverage by CNN and MSNBC. And I don't watch those shows, but I imagine that there's some interest there. I imagine there's quite a bit of interest there. And I imagine that for the people who are in charge of those networks, it's not good news. So the good news for them is that right now, as of the DNC's rule change, if a candidate doesn't acquire 50.1% or greater of pledged delegates, so let's discuss what pledged delegates are in a minute. If a candidate doesn't acquire 50.1% or greater of pledged delegates going into the DNC in June of 2020, said candidates will be open for a contested convention, which is actually relatively rare. Jamal Thomas pointed this out. And in the event, for example, and his numbers are actually similar to my predictions, is that perhaps it's quite possible that Bernie Sanders wins 46% of pledged delegates going into the DNC. And say, for example, Joe Biden wins 33%. Well, because Bernie Sanders didn't break that 50.1% threshold, then the DNC still has the capability of throwing the candidate who is most electable against Donald Trump. And we know who they would say, despite the polling numbers and despite the turnouts and despite everything, it's very, very likely they would go for Biden. And it's not because he's more electable than Sanders, or even Elizabeth Warren for that matter. It's that he's more likely to do the bidding of the benefactors of the DNC members, as well as the oligarchy in general, and the Democratic Party, as well as the Republican Party. So yeah, we're getting a little bit deep into motivation. What is motivating these people to do what they're doing behind the scenes? I don't really want to speak particularly to any particular candidate other than Joe Biden. And what I want to say about Joe Biden is that Joe Biden represents, the old guard and some bullshit manner of legitimacy to neoliberalism in the Democratic Party. Fortunately for us, in 2015, Bernie Sanders came along on the heels of the Occupy movement and spoke truth to power. And for whatever problems you have with Bernie Sanders, it's pretty unmistakable that the policy platform that he put together under the advisement of his economic team was both socially sound as well as economically sound. And actually, it got some traction in terms of political viability. I think to the surprise of probably Bernie Sanders. So when we're looking at, going into the contests, in 2020, we can begin to look at what's going to happen. Well, we'll look at it from the positive perspective. And positive is my own framing, so you don't have to actually agree with this. But what happens if Bernie Sanders wins Iowa, wins New Hampshire, wins Nevada, and wins many states throughout Super Tuesday? Say he's carrying like 65%. Well, it's very, politically predictable that a lot of the clown car will empty, but a lot of them will stay around for a while. Okay. So then we've got other contests coming up. We've got a little bit of a problem here with people who are, vote green no matter who, or only support Bernie Sanders if he's an independent. And lo and behold, their state only has closed primaries, and you can't vote for, who's not on the ballot. And if you're not registered as a Democrat, you can't vote for, anybody, unless you want to vote for, the opposition party known as the Green Party. So to me, I think that what's really relevant here is looking at, we can talk about the election rigging, which is going to happen. The software is going to be, rigged a bit. On the other hand, we can look at it in terms of if Bernie Sanders is exit polling, his victories are by 60, 70%. And then say the outcome is like he won 24%. We're going to have a lot of outrage from the Bernie supporters. And we're going to have a lot of scrutiny of the machines themselves. I, of course, would be largely in favor of hand-counted paper ballots in public view, double-checked. And it's quite possible that we could do that, but it's not going to happen during this campaign cycle. So we're going to have to look for in a positive direction is that Bernie is winning these contests by such a large margin. Not every state, nobody can win every state, but by such a large margin that, number one, a bunch of people drop out of the race. A bunch of the candidates drop out of the race relatively early on, by February. And number two, his margins of victory are so high that he's amassing delegates. And then, we'll just move forward to, the end of the convention and, or the end of the contest in June. And he arbitrarily has won 53% of the pledged delegates, in which case he is the nominee for the Democratic Party. Great. He goes head-to-head against Donald Trump. He beats Donald Trump by 10 percentage points in both the Electoral College and the gross numbers of voters in general. So, yay, okay? And meanwhile, the activist community is stumping hard for his policies and his platform. And then the sub aspect of that is the MMT community is talking about how these policies are macroeconomically sound. The academics are backing up the activists, and we've got this, wow, we've got Shangri-La. Another thing we have happening, which is a really beautiful thing, which could have happened in 2016, but it didn't, is that with high voter enthusiasm, we've got down ballot Democrats. And I'm actually talking about Democrats as a positive thing here, believe it or not, even though I dem exited, I'll dem enter again. We've got high voter enthusiasm, and we've got a lot of down ballot, maybe Our Revolution Democrats or Justice Democrats who are running, with Bernie Sanders at the helm. We've got high voter turnout. And it's a very, very easy thing to say that with high voter turnout, Democrats win. It's an old adage. We've known this forever. So with high voter turnout, Bernie Sanders defeats Donald Trump, and many Senate seats flip in favor of Democrats. Democrats retain a majority in the Senate. Congress has even more seats flip in favor of Democrats. And then we have what happened in 2008, which is known as a mandate. Everybody knows what a mandate is. It means that the President of the United States has the ability to use their pulpit to command respect and to command a policy platform, whatever it might be, and to enact it. And that the voting public will support it and demand it, and that the opposition, the neoliberal opposition, in this case, could not stop it from occurring. Well, that would be wonderful. So meanwhile, we have a very engaged and active activist community, macroeconomic community, voter base, and a lot of people saying, millions, I'd say a lot of people, but millions of Americans saying, we really do need a Green New Deal. We really do. And we're going to settle for nothing less than Medicare for all. And we're going to push really strongly for student debt relief and free higher education and infrastructure. And regardless of whether or not Bernie Sanders, this is all the love and light thing. I'm going to give you the positive spin first. And we've got Bernie Sanders, pushing really hard in early 2021 for all these policies, and citing numbers and calling out congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle, like, well, how are you going to vote? And we'll have a lot of backdoor deals of, well, I'll vote for that, but I can't vote for that. I can't vote for all of them. But somehow along the way, we have as close to Shangri-La as we can, which means that the entire platform gets enacted within a year or two. But then we've got the other scenario. And the other scenario is that Joe Biden, whether it's through election rigging alone or through some kind of delusion, mass delusion of the Democratic constituents, he creeps in there. Joe Biden, he's been known to creep a bit. He creeps in there with 32%, 33% of the pledged delegates. And then there's a contested convention. And in June of 2020, Joe Biden is coronated. Oh, and then we got some big problems here, because we have a lot of angry burners, or even angrier and more aware than we were in 2016 about election rigging, about how the DNC tips its finger in favor of the neoliberal candidate. And we've got low voter enthusiasm. So next worst scenario is, in my opinion, is Trump defeats Biden. And then because Trump supporters are going to come out in droves no matter what, then we potentially see the Republicans holding the Senate. And we see perhaps congressional leaders being flipped because it's every 2 years. People know that basic civics is that, you know, House members are every 2 years and senators it's every 6 years. So whoever is elected in 2018, it's not like they're in there for life. You know, I mean, we could say Ocasio-Cortez is in there for a long time. She's very populist. But we can say that some of the other, you know, reactive to Trump people who got in there into the House, the voting constituents, they can actually lose because there's low voter enthusiasm in that scenario. So then we have a House controlled by Republicans, a Senate controlled by Republicans, and Trump Part 2, or as I affectionately call it, Trump Deuce. And then we've got full-on fascism in the United States. And it's no longer Julian Assange in jail. It's, you know, I'm not going to name any names. I don't want to put any targets on anybody, but yours truly could become a target in a fascist, inverted totalitarian regime, which we're actually approaching right now. But that's only the second worst, and why I call that the second worst scenario is that in that case, we still have a progressive opposition, and we're going to have to wait it out. And we have, you know, as an MMT activist, we have 4 more years to become more educated and more aware about public policy and the functions of spending and the functions of federal taxation. You know, it's not the best. It's actually pretty shitty. It could actually mark the end of the progressive movement as well. But at least we can push against Trump. And we can push against these really bad, these really mean senators, Republican senators, really mean Republican congressmen. And God, we're so impotent. We can't do anything. We hate it. People are going to take to the streets. And nothing will get stopped. But at least there'll be opposition in that scenario. And finally, the worst scenario is, for whatever reason, Joe Biden defeats Trump, you know, by 10 electors and popular vote of a few million people. And because there's low voter enthusiasm, I'm going to call the Democrats we until proven completely wrong. And I'm willing to not call them we, because if Biden is coronated, I can't really say they're a we ever again, really ever. People are going to hate this. A lot of people who I admire and respect are going to hate me for saying these things, and it's okay. So Biden in that scenario wins, and then beneath him, down ballot congressional seats are lost, and he's got what? The executive orders and the power of the veto. Remember that? It was like 2012 to 2016. And people do know that executive orders just go back and forth, back and forth. They really don't hold any weight. And in terms of vetoes, it's just like saying no. It's like the Mick resistance. No, I will not pass your law. No, I will not nominate your, you know, whoever you bring to fill in Ruth Bader Ginsburg's seat when she dies, or Breyer's seat when he dies. No, I won't fill them. Oh, okay, great. Well, we still got a very conservative Supreme Court. There's really a lot of nothing going on. And Democrats who are in the liberal cocktail elite, as I call them, they raise their fists in the air and they go back to drinking their mocha lattes, have their eggs Benedict, and watch their 401ks and 403bs and their mutual funds go through the roof, like it always happens. And the poor get poorer and the poor starve. And we are no closer to a Green New Deal. So I'm leaving Elizabeth Warren out of the picture a little bit, not because she's a woman, believe me. If I felt she was a progressive woman on par with Bernie Sanders, I would include her more in the dialogue. But you look at her FEC filings as a senator, as I have, and you look at her donors. Those donors, who are not all maleficent, they're not all bad, those donors are going to demand payment. And they're going to get paid when she's president if she wins. That's kind of a problem. It's actually a very big problem. And I don't really have much confidence in her ability to draw the level of support during the contest state by state as I do Bernie Sanders. It's not even remotely as strong. There's some strength there. And even then, I don't know if she would have a mandate. So there you have it. This is just me calling it the way I see it, that essentially we have to see Bernie Sanders crushing it, destroying, detonating, absolutely annihilating the clown car, by 60 or 70% over, the first 20 contests, or else I think the revolution will end in terms of the activism, no matter what, actually. Even with Trump as president, I think the revolution ended. The opposition won't end, but the revolution will end. So the focus of what I want to do on this show moving forward is very particular. The focus is to establish the economics of Bernie Sanders' platform. We know he's in favor of social justice, and we know that is tied to economic justice, and we know that's tied to racial justice. But I want to focus on the economics of how do we afford Medicare for all? How do we afford an infrastructure bill, which is $2 trillion over 10 years? How do we afford all of the policies in this platform? And I think that if we realize that you cannot do this literally by virtue of the way federal spending and taxation occur, if you realize that taxes for spending have been obsolete for 73 years, as Beardsley Rummel, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, said, 1946, there is no longer a need for tax revenue. There is no longer a need for federal taxation in order to have revenue at the federal level. And that has been the case for 73 years. And spending since 1971 in a monetarily sovereign fiat regime has been by congressional appropriation, and the only limits to federal spending are available goods, services, and resources, both domestically and that which we can purchase internationally. So when we realize that, then we realize that all of the pillars, all of the policies within Bernie Sanders' platform, and to some extent Elizabeth Warren's platform, are feasible. Each of the policies within Bernie Sanders' platform is feasible. His economic team has crunched numbers. They've looked at scaling, how it is that you enact policies, how do you do it over time, how do you get the states involved and the local communities involved. It's all been figured out, more or less. There's a lot of work to be done to inform local and state governments. Nonetheless, it's all there. Clear as crystal. So they've stolen fizzy lifting drinks for quite some time, and it's time to take it back. And I don't really hesitate to say that it's going to happen with Bernie Sanders. Despite election tampering, despite fraudulent vote counting, despite voter suppression laws in states like Florida, it's going to happen. He's going to win. But if he doesn't, it's better that Trump wins. All right. Well, good night, everybody. I'll look forward to talking to you soon. Again, this is Nick with Real Progressives. Take care. Bye.